Hello and welcome to our special live coverage of the official welcoming ceremony of President Yoon Suk-yeol's state visit to the United States. I'm Kim Mo-kyun. Beginning today at Arirang we will be breaking into our regular programming to bring you a series of live broadcasts of major itineraries of President Yoon Suk-yeol's six-day state visit to Washington. And we'll start with the official welcoming event, which we'll be able to watch in a couple of minutes. So to give you some background, the South Korean president arrived in the States on Monday together with First Lady Kim Gun-hee, and he's also being accompanied by a 122-person business delegation made up of chiefs of conglomerates, including the chairs of Samsung Electronics, SK Group, and Hyundai Motor Group Executive Chair Chung Hee-sun. The visit was made at the invitation of President Biden as Seoul and Washington mark the 70th anniversary of alliance between the two nations. Now, this will mark the first state visit by a South Korean president to the U.S. in 12 years since former President Lee Myung-bak in 2011. And through this, President Yoon Suk-yeol will also be the second foreign leader after French President Emmanuel Macron to pay such a visit under the Biden administration. Their well-awaited summit, which will be held in a few hours from now, will mark the sixth meeting between Yoon and Biden, following those in Seoul last May and then in Madrid, London, New York, and Phnom Penh. They're also expected to discuss the allies' joint response measures to North Korea's acts of provocations and other global challenges. For those who are just joining us right now, we're about to bring you the welcoming ceremony for President Yoon Suk-yeol's state visit to Washington. And like we've heard, a lot will be on the agenda. So as we wait for the welcoming ceremony to officially kick off, let's talk a little bit about the various issues surrounding the allies. And for a comprehensive analysis and a preview of what we might be able to look forward to, we are joined in the studio by two experts. First, we have Mason Ritchie, professor of international politics at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies to my right, and Sung-Soo Eric Kim, adjunct professor at the School of Business Administration at Ulsan National Institute of Science and Technology to my left. Welcome to you both to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having me.
Now, we're just minutes away from the beginning of the official welcoming ceremony of President Yoon's state visit to the United States. I cannot help but ask about your expectations about this visit. Let's start with Professor Kim. Tell us about your expectations and which part of President Yoon's trip are you looking most forward to?
This summit is very important because this year remarks the 70th year of the Korea-U.S. alliance. And this summit is held in 12 years since the last visit of President Myung-bak Lee. So it's not very important in terms of the significant years, but it is very important because our economic status have elevated and we are a very important economic partner of the United States. And as well, we have a lot to discuss about security issues. So this summit is very important in the view that we have a lot to exchange in terms of a security and economic dialogue between two countries.
Right, in both sectors, security and economic aspects. Now, let's rewind a little bit to when President Yoon Suk-yeol first arrived at Joint Base Andrews in Maryland. He was greeted by senior U.S. officials, including U.S. Ambassador to South Korea Philip Goldberg and White House National Security Council Coordinator for Indo-Pacific Kurt Campbell. Professor Ritchie, how much significance do you think Washington is putting on President Yoon's visit, and what do you think they want out of it?
They're putting a lot of emphasis on it. Anytime that you, as President of the United States, grant a head of state from another country a state visit, that automatically means that you're taking that relationship very seriously, not only for that other country, but also for the United States as well. So obviously they're putting a lot of emphasis on that. This is a high-profile, important event, both in Washington and also here in Seoul, obviously. I think what they're looking for in Washington from this event, in the first place, is a celebration of 70 years. I think one of the things that's really become increasingly important in Washington is how South Korea functions not only as a military ally, but also as an ally and a partner on values, notably in defending what we sometimes refer to as the rules-based international order, or sometimes the liberal international order. And so I think we're really, sort of celebrating that 70 years of the development of South Korea and its partnership with the U.S., as it's become capable of taking on this role not only as a military ally, but as a partner and values as well. So I think that's important, not only looking back to the past for Washington, but also looking forward, because the United States really is beginning to look at the world in terms of how to defend that rules-based international order, particularly in the face of Chinese revisionism and Russian revisionism and the sort of potential axis of authoritarian states. And so the United States is looking to get as many of its partners and allies as possible to be value oriented in that regard. So I think that's something that Washington wants to come out of it. Beyond that, obviously, you have more obvious I won't call them transactional, but some of them are quite fundamental. But some other important things such as extended deterrence. We know that this Washington Declaration is going to come out, which is going to enhance extended deterrence against North Korea. The United States wants economic and supply chain growth with South Korea as a partner there. Trilateral cooperation with Japan and South Korea and the United States here in the Indo-Pacific region. I think we're looking at, obviously, the United States getting a recommitment from South Korea not to develop nuclear weapons, which is something that's been quite bubbling up recently. And I think the United States wants to see, perhaps South Korea look a little bit more favorably towards the possibility of supplying Ukraine with lethal aid in its attempt to defend itself against a Russian invasion.
Right, so a lot of topics should be on the agenda. You slightly touched upon the Washington Declaration, but do you think that could be South Korea's topmost prioritization for the summit?
One would have to think that one of the things that South Korea prioritizes, and arguably the thing that it prioritizes the most, is indeed getting Washington to enhance its extended deterrence commitments vis-a-vis North Korea. And we're going to see precisely what comes out of the Washington Declaration in terms of exactly what this is supposed to do. But at least what we've gotten on background so far from senior administration officials indicates that the United States is going to declare again much more strongly and put behind that declaration some assets in order to try to calm the elites in South Korea with respect to their potential fears about U.S. credibility in terms of extended nuclear deterrence. We'll have to see the language on that, I think, before we can make a judgment call. I think South Korea obviously wants really and I guess Yoon in particular really wants to be able to sell how important it is for South Korea to be a partner and an ally of the United States, because it gives South Korea a springboard to the global stage. Again, he's going to get to make a speech in front of a joint session of Congress. That's also quite rare. That's something that will get international attention. So I think he'll want that, of course, selfishly, like all politicians. He'll hope that gives him some domestic political benefit here at home, considering that his poll numbers aren't great. So clearly he wants that for himself. I think he's going to want to try to sell how the great relationship with the United States right now is in part due to the audacious step that he's taken to improve relations with Japan. And I think domestically he hasn't gotten a lot of credit for that. So I can only assume that he thinks that the positives and the aura of this meeting with Biden and the state visit will help justify that domestically. And I think he'll, of course, want to work out many business deals. We already know that he has this big delegation, so that's something that's going to be obviously on the agenda. And that's important for Yoon, because the Inflation Reduction Act and some of the other economic policies from Washington seem to have rubbed Seoul the wrong way a little bit. So being able to come back with some investment deals in South Korea, I think, is something that's important for him. And then lastly, I think he's also going to want to walk away from this, perhaps getting some freedom of action on what to do with Ukraine. He hasn't perhaps made a full decision about where the lethal aid is going to go, whether or not it will continue to go only to partners of Ukraine, or whether or not it will start going directly to Ukraine. So I think he's going to want to walk away from this with some freedom from action there and not feel like he's boxed in one way or the other. Mm-hmm.
Now, just like Professor Rishi mentioned, alongside security issues, Seoul is also looking forward to some economic accomplishments through the latest visit. And President Yoon was accompanied by a massive delegation, like I've said, of 122 people. And there will be also related events on that front. Professor Kim, what kind of level of achievement do you anticipate?
So this is also a very historical visit because we never had that amount of our economic leaders visiting United States alongside with the president. That is very symbolic because it emphasized the importance of the Korea-U.S. economic relationship. Since we are living in a digital economy, these two nations who are leading the digital economy, Korea and the United States, is seeking for more collaboration in economic alliance. So in that sense, not only for Korea, but it is very important in the U.S. standpoint to have a collaborative alliance with Korean companies such as Samsung Electronics, who is a leader in the semiconductor industry, which is the rice of the industry, and Hyundai Motors or LG Energy Solution, who provides superior electrical vehicles. But we have to solve a couple of dialogues with the United States in terms of the Inflation Reduction Act, which restricts our economic activities of our Korean companies. And also we have a long dialogue that we have to continue with the U.S. government on the CHIP Act, so-called, because it also restricts our position as a tech leader in the global economy. But at the same time, we will also discuss about the investment packages we will exchange between United States and Korea. So we're hoping that we can come to an agreement to lift some of the sanctions of the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIP Act, and in return, agree on a greater deal of investment packages that we can exchange.
Right. So you mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act and the Chips and Science Act. Do you think, well, we know that South Korean companies, of course, want some leeway on that front. What do you think about possibilities as an expert in the field? Do you think in Washington's point of stance, is there some chance for some leeway on that front?
So when we're talking about diplomatic dialogues, the give and take should be really, really clear. So we are not only considering the dialogue in a solely economic standpoint. The dialogue is also tied with a security package that we will exchange. So the best strategy for the Korean government to take is to discuss a greater investment package in the United States, and in return, ask for lifting the sanctions that are too much strict to the Korean companies, or delaying the application, the implementation of such sanctions, so that we can earn time to correspond to the global economic change and reposition our strategic business strategies in the global economy.
Right. So let's hope for some kind of at least a little bit of development on that front. Actually, we were supposed to turn over to the White House just a few minutes ago, but we're hearing that there was some delay in the opening of the welcoming ceremony at the White House. So because they're kind of having a rehearsal right now. So we are going to proceed again with our panel discussion until the event officially kicks off. So now turning back to Professor Rishi. The latest summit comes at the invitation of President Biden, with the two allies marking their 70th anniversary of friendship. And President Yoon Suk-yeol applauded the relationship as being the most successful alliance in history. How do you gauge the current Seoul-Washington relationship 70 years on?
Yeah, I think it's pretty good, even very good. I was just yesterday at the ASEAN Plenum. It's a large international affairs gathering here in Seoul. and they bring in not only speakers from Korea and experts in think tanks or in business or in government, but also from the United States as well. And one of the things that was very obvious was that there was an enormous consensus on both the Korean side and the U.S. side that the state of the alliance is currently excellent and perhaps in some measures the best that it's ever been. And that's, I think, currently. If we want to look back, there's a lot to celebrate. 70 years on a peninsula, with the most heavily, fortified border in the world, and yet we haven't had an outbreak of kinetic hot conflict since the end of the Korean War in 1953. There have been some incidents here and there, some tragedies, some clearly malicious bellicose behavior by North Korea, but it hasn't spilled over into a large-scale hot conflict. So deterrence has largely held, and that's because of the U.S.-South Korea alliance. I think we can make a pretty good argument. Beyond that, we see South Korea, as I mentioned earlier, having developed into a vibrant democracy that shares values with other liberal states who both domestically apply the rule of law as opposed to dictatorships that use the rule by law, by the strong, in order to repress their populations, and also internationally, states like South Korea working with other middle power allies, with the United States in order to uphold the rules-based international order. So I think that's a tremendous success story. There's obviously the flourishing business relationship between the United States and South Korea. It's a tremendously vibrant relationship that's underpinned, of course, ultimately by the Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement. And I would make the argument that it's also quite telling how we've seen South Korea evolve from a state that was largely influenced by the U.S. to itself now influencing the U.S. We just saw Blackpink headlining at Coachella. We've seen BTS giving speeches at the United Nations. The South Korean pop culture, obviously, but obviously beyond that, whether that be Samsung or SK or Hyundai or other companies, I mean, the influence that they have now in the United States, I think, is also significant. That being said, there are some things that are undercurrents on the alliance that are worrisome or that are trouble spots that need to be dealt with. The first one, obviously, is extended deterrence, and we're going to see during the summit to what extent they make some progress there. There's obviously a sort of shift towards some economic nationalism in the United States. We see that with the Inflation Reduction Act, but other things as well. We see the potential rise of Donald Trump and the Make America Great Again kind of movement that might threaten some of the relationship. And then, of course, the larger issues geopolitically with respect to how South Korea positions itself between the U.S. and China, which is its largest economic partner, of course, is something that's going to have to be paid quite a bit of attention to going forward.
Right. What about you, Professor Kim? 70 years on, this decades of relationship. How do you diagnose the business relationship between the two countries?
We cannot discuss our economy without United States. United States cannot discuss the economy without Korea. So that's the strong economic bonding we have between United States and Korea. Of course, we have other very important business partners. For example, in Asia, we have Japan and China and other Southeast Asian countries. But still, U.S. is very important in our economic relationship, especially in the digital economy domain. So I think, again, this is the emphasis of this year's summit, that we are strengthening alliance in the digital economy domain, strengthening alliance in semiconductors, strengthening alliance in clean energy and space and media creation and etc. That will be important to grow for the next decades between two countries.
Right. So more is ahead of us on the digital economy front between the two countries. Now, Professor Ritchie, then what kind of direction, diplomatic direction, I mean, should the Seoul-Washington alliance head towards?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the most important things, at least in the near and midterm future, is going to be trying to keep trilateral relations on the front burner. We'll see how well the South Korea-Japan détente takes hold and how well rooted that becomes. But I think that's quite important. When you look at what's happening in Northeast Asia or in East Asia more generally, or more broadly in the Indo-Asia-Pacific region, we're seeing some threats to what we call the Asian peace over the last 4 or 5 decades, and I think the best way to counter that is through many-lateral cooperation that involves the United States, South Korea, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore. These are all countries that can work together to uphold the rules-based order. So I think that's something that's quite important going forward in the near to midterm future.
Right. Now, we are seeing some footage here on the White House. I think I see Vice President Kamala Harris over there. I think they're waiting for President Yoon Suk-yeol and First Lady Kim Gun-hee to arrive at the front of the White House as we speak. Yes, I think the official welcoming ceremony is about to start in a few seconds. Now we're seeing a full size picture of the White House. And I think President Yoon Suk-yeol and the First Lady and his delegation haven't arrived yet at the White House, and they're still waiting for them. So while looking at the footage of the White House as we speak, let's return to our conversation. Professor Kim, another top agenda item during the summit between the two leaders will be to expand personal exchanges. What do we mean by this personal exchanges?
So in order to enforce economic relationship and actually implement economic relationships, it's vital to exchange human capital between two countries. For example, if we make an investment in the United States, it's not just about investing money. Our top human capital will go to the United States and actually execute that investment. For example, Samsung Electronics investing in Taylor, Texas, means that we're not only building a foundry factory, but our core engineers will go to the United States to cooperate with the U.S. companies in the territory of the United States. Similarly, what means that the United States is investing to Korea means that not only the capital will flow in, but the human capitals will flow in. And especially, it's very important to have a personal exchange for the digital economy standpoint, because we're on a race to develop the very important technologies.
Right.
Yes.
So this human capital exchanges, as they are going to expand economic businesses as well, right?
Yes, and we have the top research institutes in both countries. In Korea, we have KAIST, UNEST, Seoul National University, et cetera, et cetera. In the United States, we have MIT, Stanford, which is comparable with the research domain. And Korea is very advanced in the semiconductor-related engineering development, and also showing very good performance in mechanical engineering and AI research.
Oh, Professor Kim, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Okay.
I think President of the United States has just going to appear on the screen, so we will turn over to the White House. We are hearing soldiers lined up, and we're seeing footage of President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden. arrived. A car that probably where President Yoon Suk-yeol and First Lady Kim Gun-hee is in. Yes, and we have confirmed that President Yoon Suk-yeol has just arrived, and he's greeting with President Biden and First Lady Joe Biden. And First Lady Kim Gun-hee has also arrived alongside him. They are saying hi to each other. And they have stood up in a line for a photo shoot, I believe. And they are, it looks like they're saying hello to top American diplomats and national security advisors over there. President Biden's taking the lead and President Yoon's following him, and they're saying their greetings to them. Now, this is President Yoon Suk-yeol's first official state visit to the U.S. and this is the first time for a South Korean president to do so in 12 years. And the last one, I believe, was from when Presidents Obama and Lee Myung-bak met in the year 2011. And with President Yoon's latest visit, he will be President Biden's second guest coming for a state visit after French President Emmanuel Macron. Now, speaking of, state visits, as we wait for the presidents to say hello, Professor Ritchie, can you tell us more about the significance of a state visit? How common is this?
Well, it's comparatively rare. The United States president has an extremely busy schedule, and his most valuable resource is time. And so, if you're going to take the time to have a state visit, not only are you signaling that you're taking this partner or ally seriously and that you look upon them very favorably, but you're even willing to take an enormous amount of time out of, usually several days of your schedule in order to spend time with them. And that's in addition to all the prep work that goes into it in the beginning. There's only 24 hours in a day. There's only a certain number of people, who are able to set these things up. Whether that be your foreign minister, or your Secretary of State, or your protocol office, et cetera. So it's really indicating how important you take that out.
Professor, let's listen to the national
anthem of the United States. Present arms.
Right, so we just saw some footage of the two leaders stepping up the podium to salute to their flags as they listen to the national anthems of the two countries. Now, the national anthem has just ended as we speak, and the two leaders are still up on the podium. We hear from our White House correspondents that the White House is under very tightened security right now, and people cannot get near the White House, unlike what was observed before. Now, President Biden and President Yoon is stepping down the podium. And I think they're taking a stroll, probably to say hi to everyone. We see that there are a lot of people who gathered over there, waving flags waving national flags. And soon, I think we will be able to see some parade and listen to some special performance by young Korean Americans there. We're currently seeing footage of the Honor Guard parade with President Yoon Suk-yeol and President Joe Biden walking down in front of the White House. Has just come to a close. And this is a familiar footage of when French President Emmanuel Macron has visited the White House, the first such state visit in the Biden administration. Now the two leaders are going up the podium again. President Biden is about to deliver his welcoming speech.
Truth and review! Cut. Ready. Cut. Ceremonial. At ease. Cut. Stand at ease. Mr. President, this concludes the honors.
Distinguished guests, the President of the United States.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. What a beautiful day to invite great friends back to the White House. Welcome to the White House. Today we celebrate the ironclad alliance, the shared vision of our future, and the deep friendship that unites the Republic of Korea and the United States. President Yoon, Ms. Kim, you were kind enough to host me in Seoul last year, just 10 days after your inauguration. And Jill and I were honored to be able to return some of your hospitality with your second state visit to this administration.
철통 같은 동맹을 축하하고 우리의 미래를 위해 우리가 공유하는 비전 그리고 우리의 깊은 우정을 통해 대한민국과 미국이 연합해 됨을 경축하고자 합니다. 윤석열 대통령님, 김건희 여사님, 취임하신 지 불과 열흘 후이셨음에도 작년 서울에서 저를 따뜻하게 맞아주신 데 대해 감사드립니다. 저와 제 아내는 이제 그때 받은 환대를 저희 행정부의 제2차 국빈 방문을 통해 일부나마 갚아드릴 수 있게 되어 기쁩니다.
This year marks the 70th anniversary of the alliance between our two nations. It's an unbreakable bond, forged in bravery and the sacrifice of our people, sanctified by the blood of American and Korean troops who fought and defended liberty. And I'm proud we are joined today by veterans of the Korean War.
올해는 우리 두 국가의 동맹 70주년을 맞이하는 해입니다. 이는 우리 국민들의 용기와 희생의 토대 위에 세워진 끊어질 수 없는 관계입니다. 자유를 수호하기 위해 함께 싸운 미군 그리고 한국군 장병의 피로 거룩하게 된 관계인 것입니다. 오늘 특별히 한국전 참전용사 분들께서 이 자리에 함께하고 계신 것에 큰 자부심을 느낍니다.
Those veterans are the reason we can stand here today. Two vibrant and innovative democracies, we stand as strong, proud, and free because of them. And it's so meaningful, Mr. President, to visit the Korean War Veterans Memorial with you last night, to lay a wreath of remembrance, to fulfill a sacred obligation.
예, 이 참전 용사분들은 활발하고 혁신적인 민주주의 국가인 우리 두 나라가 강하고 당당하고 자유롭게 함께 설 수 있는 이유입니다. 윤 대통령님 또한 어제 저녁 대통령님 내외분과 함께 한국전 참전 기념비를 방문하여 기념 헌화하고 우리의 거룩한 의무를 수행한 것은 의미 있는 시간이었습니다.
On September 1, 1950, Corporal Luther Story performed acts of bravery above and beyond all measure, defending his brothers in arms on the Pusan perimeter in the Korean War. The last anyone saw of the corporal he was wounded, fighting off the hostile assault to protect his company's withdrawal. In 1951, his heroism was recognized with the Medal of Honor, but Corporal Story's body was never accounted for until now. The Republic of Korea and the United States worked together to identify Corporal Story's remains among those buried as a Korean War unknown in the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific. Today, we can return him to his family and to his rest with all the honors he deserves, because we never forget our heroes.
1950년 9월 1일 루서 스토리 상병은 한국정 당시 부산 교두보에서 동료 전우들을 보호하기 위해 모든 수단을 초월해 용기를 발휘했습니다. 스토리 상병을 마지막으로 복격한 사람들의 증언에 따르면 그는 자기 자신 부상당한 채로 퇴각하는 중대를 보호하고자 적군의 공격에 맞서 싸웠습니다. 이듬해 1951년 그의 영웅적인 행동이 인정받아 자유훈장이 추서되었습니다. 하지만 상병의 유해는 찾지 못했습니다. 바로 최근까지 말이죠. 그러나 대한민국과 미국은 협력을 통해 국립태평양 기념묘지의 한국인 무명용사 유해 가운데 스토리 상병의 유해를 찾아내게 되었고, 오늘 스토리 상병을 그가 마땅히 받아야 할 영예와 함께 그의 가족의 품 그리고 참된 안식으로 되돌려 드릴 수 있게 되었습니다. 이는 우리가 우리의 영웅을 결코 잊지 않았기 때문이었습니다.
Mr. President, over the past 7 decades, our alliance has grown stronger and more capable. And the cooperation between our people, our commitment to one another, has grown deeper across every aspect of our partnership. Today, our economies are in the vanguard of technological development. Our nations are powerhouses of innovation. And our people, united still by our democratic values, are taking on the challenges of the world. We're taking them on together. We're standing strong against Russia's brutal aggression against Ukraine, advancing an Indo-Pacific region that is free and open, building secure and resilient supply chains, and pioneering the clean energy economy. Investing together to ensure our future will be grounded in the values that we share, which have always made us strong.
대통령님, 지난 70년 동안 우리의 동맹은 그 힘과 능력이 증가되어 왔습니다. 우리 양 국민들 간의 협력, 서로를 향한 헌신 또한 우리의 파트너십의 모든 측면에 걸쳐 깊어져 왔습니다. 오늘 우리 양국 경제는 기술 발전의 선봉에 서 있습니다. 우리 두 국가는 혁신의 파워하우스, 동력입니다. 우리 국민들은 민주주의적 가치 아래 하나 되어 전 세계의 도전에 함께 대응하고 있습니다. 우리는 우크라이나에 대한 러시아의 잔인한 침공에 함께 맞서고 있으며, 자유롭고 개방된 인태 지역을 위해 일하고 안전하고 회복력 있는 공급망 구축, 청정에너지 경제 선도를 통해 우리가 함께 공유하는 가치, 그리고 과거에도 언제나 우리를 강하게 만들어준 그 가치 위에 우리의 미래 역시 그 기반을 둘 수 있도록 하기 위해 함께 투자하고 있습니다.
Mr. President, ours is a future filled with unimaginable opportunity and endless possibility. Nothing is beyond our ability to reach when our nations and our people stand united. We have proven that time and again over the last 70 years. As our troops say, who still proudly serve together in the ROK to this day, we go together. May we continue that refrain of the Republic of Korea and the United States for all the days ahead. We go together. God bless our nations, and God protect our troops. Thank you.
대통령님, 우리의 미래는 엄청난 기회와 무한한 가능성으로 채워져 있습니다. 우리 두 국가와 양국민이 함께 선다면 우리가 하지 못할 일은 없을 것입니다. 지난 70년 동안 우리는 이를 계속해 입증해 왔습니다. 우리 장병들, 지금도 당당하게 대한민국에서 함께 복무하는 이들이 오늘까지 함께 외치는 것처럼 같이 갑시다. 또한 이 함성이 다가오는 미래에도 대한민국과 미 합중국의 변치 않는 합창소리요 후렴이 되길 기원합니다. 함께 갑시다. 하나님께서 우리 양국을 축복하시고 우리 장병들을 보호하시길 기도하고 축원합니다.
Distinguished guests, the President of the Republic of Korea.
존경하는 조 바이든 대통령님, 질 바이든 박사님, 그리고 귀빈 여러분, 저는 어제 조 바이든 대통령님 그리고 질 바이든 박사님과 함께 내셔널몰에 있는 한국전 참전 기념 공원에 다녀왔습니다.
Mr. President, Dr. Biden, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, last evening my wife and I visited the Korean War Memorial on the National Mall with President Biden and Dr. Biden.
저는 그곳에서 우리는 전혀 알지 못하는 나라, 만난 적 없는 국민을 지키기 위해 국가의 부름에 응한 우리의 아들과 딸들에게 경의를 표한다는 비문을 보았습니다.
There I saw the epitaph that reads, "Our nation honors her sons and daughters who answered the call to defend a country they never knew and a people they never met."
왜 그들은 알지 못한 나라, 만난 적 없는 국민을 위해 목숨을 바쳤을까요? 그것은 바로 자유를 지키기 위한 것이었습니다.
Why did they sacrifice their lives for this faraway country and for the people they never met? That was for one noble cause, to defend freedom.
한미동맹은 자유를 위한 투쟁의 결과 탄생한 혈맹입니다. 한미동맹은 이익에 따라 만나고 헤어지는 거래관계가 아닙니다. 한미동맹은 자유라는 보편적 가치를 수호하기 위한 가치 동맹입니다.
The ROK-U.S. alliance was forged in blood as a result of our fight for freedom. The ROK-U.S. alliance is not a transactional relationship. It does not operate for the sake of mere interest. The ROK-U.S. alliance is an alliance of values standing together to safeguard the universal value of freedom.
그러므로 한미동맹은 정의로운 동맹입니다. 한미동맹은 세계의 자유와 평화, 번영을 위한 글로벌 동맹입니다. 한미동맹은 미래로 나아가는 동맹이고 행동하는 동맹입니다. 저는 동맹의 70년 역사를 되돌아보고 동맹의 미래를 함께 설계하기 위해 여기 왔습니다. 그리고 자랑스러운 동맹 70주년을 동맹국 국민들과 함께 기쁜 마음으로 축하하고 기념하기 위해 여기에 왔습니다.
Thus, the ROK-U.S. alliance is a just alliance. It is a global alliance for the freedom, peace, and prosperity around the world. The ROK-U.S. alliance is an alliance in action, moving toward the future. Ladies and gentlemen, I came here to look back to the 70-year-long history of our alliance and with President Biden to design the vision for our shared future. I came here to celebrate and congratulate on the 70th anniversary of the alliance with pride, with joy, and with the American people.
다시 한번 국빈으로 초청해 주신 바이든 대통령님, 질 바이든 박사님, 그리고 미국 국민 여러분께 감사드립니다.
President Dr. Biden, I once again thank you for your kind invitation for my state visit, and I also thank the American people for your warm welcome and hospitality. Thank you.
Right, it looks like the speeches of the presidents have just ended. They ended with a handshake and they embraced each other. So the core of what their speeches was that the two countries would go together and stand together for the universal value of freedom. Professor Rishi, what were your takeaways from the speeches?
Yeah, so a number of things. This may sound kind of silly, but one of the things that really stood out to me is it's actually a beautiful day in Washington. And that might seem like that's a small detail, but one of the things that leaders want to get out of these kinds of events are great photo ops. And the photo ops are always so much better when the sun is shining, if it's raining, or especially if it's raining and you're under an umbrella, but even if it's cloudy and overcast, the pictures aren't as vibrant, the colors aren't as vibrant, so I think they're going to be happy with the photo ops they're going to get out of this. Those are sort of the official ones. After that, there's always the sort of special photo op, the one where they're leaning over a table together or, sharing a moment that's supposedly off camera that shows a sort of special relationship. So we'll see what comes out of that in terms of it, but I think that's something that they'll be happy with. Then obviously the next thing I noticed is, obviously the U.S. has laid out the red carpet. Look at who's there. There's Lloyd Austin, the Defense Secretary. Obviously Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary. So there you've got the diplomatic part of it, the military part of it, and the economic relationship part of it. And that's in addition to Kamala Harris, who was there, the Vice President, Kurt Campbell, the Asia Pacific Coordinator, Philip Goldberg, the U.S. Ambassador, and they were countered by their South Korean counterparts.
Right. And now I think the two leaders and their first ladies have stepped up the balcony of the White House, and we're seeing footage of them waving to participants and citizens who gathered over there. And next on the agenda will be a summit between the two leaders, a long-awaited summit between President Biden and President Yoon. Right, and we're seeing the two leaders go in the White House. They will hold a summit, and we will provide a live coverage of that event as well. So stay tuned. Now let's get back to our discussion with our panel of experts. Professor, again, like I've said, you mentioned that there were a lot of diplomatic people, diplomatic officials seen on the ceremony. So, and there was a red carpet, right? So it's a sign that Washington has prepared a lot for this event.
Yeah, obviously, I said, look at the big names that were there. Clearly, the speeches were, coordinated in advance. You can, clearly see how both sides really focused in on values. You heard the word freedom come out quite a bit. And then there was a coordinated effort to sort of look back to the last 70 years, notably some of the tragic, sort of origins of the U.S.-South Korea alliance, notably the Korean War itself, but then how things have developed going forward, notably with how vibrant, South Korea has become as a powerhouse economy and a democracy. I'll also note one other small detail. You asked me one of the things that what stood out to me. I noticed that the South Korean side, whoever in the foreign ministry wrote the speech, or whoever in the Yongsan presidential office, wrote the speech, or however many hands were involved in that, somebody flagged something that I thought was kind of interesting, which is that President Yoon repeatedly referred to Jill Biden as Dr. Biden. And there was actually, at the end of the campaign period in 2020, and then into the first part of Biden's administration in 2021, a sort of small controversy that erupted over whether or not Jill Biden should be referred to as Dr. Biden or not. And apparently it bristled the White House that some of the news outlets in the United States weren't referring to her as Dr. Biden. but instead is Mrs. Biden. It's a long, arcane story about why that might or might not be okay. But somebody here clearly has understood that she and the White House would prefer that she refer to in public as Dr. Biden. And so we heard him on at least 3 or 4 separate occasions refer to her as Dr. Biden. So somebody there did a nice job of putting that personal touch on the relationship, because obviously, that's going to make, that's going to make Dr. Biden and President Biden happy that this was, executed publicly so that the world can see that.
So it could have been a strategic one.
I think that my guess is somebody there paid attention to some of the political currents that happened in the United States at that point, and someone here in South Korea must have remembered, oh yeah, we need to make sure that we refer to the First Lady as Dr. Biden, and that's a pretty smart move. I think that will obviously help South Korea ingratiate themselves to the Biden family.
Now, what about you, Professor Kim? What was your biggest takeaway from the welcoming event?
Well, I think President Biden specifically said that we go together, and President Yoon said blood alliance. So I think this is emphasizing that Korean War, sometimes referred as the forgotten war in the United States, is indeed not forgotten. The reason why in the United States sometimes the Korean War is referred to as the forgotten war is because it occurred right after the World War II. And after Korean War, there was the Vietnamese War, which was very politically important. But the two presidents are emphasizing that Korean War is very important in the Korea-U.S. relationship. And specifically, President Biden said that nothing is unable to reach when our nations are united. And President Yoon corresponded that the Korea-U.S. alliance is a value alliance defending freedom. And President Biden emphasized that Korea and the United States is a powerhouse of innovation, emphasizing resilient supply chain and clean energy, giving a teaser that IRA and the Chip and Science Act will be one of the main topics in the economic agenda. And President Yoon corresponded that Korea-U.S. alliance is a global alliance, emphasizing that Korea will take a global role in the global economy through the Korea-U.S. alliance.
Now, we've heard about the welcoming speeches of the two leaders. There wasn't a direct mention of North Korea during the speech, but we know for a fact that it's going to be one of the top agendas of their summit talks. Professor Ritchie, this is especially important amid growing concern over Pyongyang's evolving nuclear capabilities and, like we said, extended deterrence from Washington. Can you remind us of the current situation? How much of a deterrence is Washington guaranteeing Seoul at the moment?
Sure. So indeed, the speeches didn't specifically talk about North Korea, for obvious reasons. You don't want to let Kim Jong-un hijack your party. And Yoon, even went so far as to say that the alliance is not transactional, and so this particular 70th anniversary celebration and a state visit, particularly these big formal moments, they're supposed to be about optics and a bright sunny message. There was an undercurrent, however, that you got out of it, which was that this is an alliance that's been forged in blood. It goes back to the 1950 to 1953 Korean War, and of course the extension of that going forward is the division of the peninsula, and that's where North Korea comes into play, sort of between the lines. Where we are today, obviously, North Korea has an expanding, more sophisticated, and more capable nuclear arsenal than ever before. It has absolutely no intention of denuclearizing, and it is well on its way to successfully developing not only tactical nuclear weapons, which can be used against South Korean targets, but also intercontinental ballistic missiles that can be used to target the United States. And one of the sort of working theories here is that North Korea wants to use this ability to hit the United States as a way to what we call decouple the United States from South Korea, to drive a wedge between the two, notably by making South Korea worried that the United States will not be able to uphold its commitments to extend nuclear deterrence to South Korea if there were to be a crisis and deterrence were to come under risk. Washington doesn't see it that way. Washington, basically makes an argument that its current nuclear posture, its current nuclear capabilities, and its declaratory policy is all sufficient. But South Korea, elite opinion at least, seems to think that this is maybe not entirely the case. And so Washington is doubling down with a greater commitment, including strategic assets coming into the peninsula.
Right, but on the other hand, North Korea seems to be relatively quiet lately. This is quite different from what they did when President Yoon headed for a visit to Japan when they launched an ICBM. What kind of reaction do you think we could expect from the regime?
Yeah, that's a good question. It doesn't seem like, at least the last time I checked my phone to see if I had any messages coming in, that North Korea is engaged in any provocative behavior in the lead up to the summit. I don't know exactly why that's the case. North Korea tests missiles and engages in provocations for a variety of different reasons. It does so for technical reasons. It does so for demonstration purposes. It does so for its own domestic political reasons. It does so as a message to the international community and to South Korea and the United States. And so for whatever reason, it has decided that this isn't the moment to carry out a missile test. One thing I think we can be almost certain of, however, is that that's not going to stay the case forever, and it will have a response at some point, and it will have a response that will, I would think, almost certainly be aimed at trying to undermine whatever is going to come out of the enhancement of U.S. extended nuclear deterrence for South Korea. And we'll get some idea of what that's going to be when the Washington Declaration on enhancing U.S. extended nuclear deterrence for South Korea comes available. When that text becomes available, my guess is North Korea is going to tailor some of their response to indicating where the holes are in that declaration.
Right, so we'll have to keep close tabs on that front. I actually have a bunch of more questions prepared for both of you, but I'm afraid I'll have to wrap up at this point. We're running out of time due to the delay. Anyhow, thank you so much, gentlemen, for making time for us today, especially at this very late hour here in Seoul. We appreciate it so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, as usual.
Now, that'll mark the end of our special broadcast of the official welcoming ceremony of President Yoon Suk-yeol's visit to the U.S. There will be an array of events lined up for President Yoon in the next couple of days before returning home, and Arirang will be providing live coverage of the major itineraries. Coming up next in an hour or so will be our special coverage of the highlight of President Yoon's state visit to the U.S., his summit with President Joe Biden. We will provide live coverage of the event alongside a simultaneous English interpretation of the leader's remarks. A press hearing, which will take place after the summit, will also be brought to you live, so don't miss it. Until then, goodbye.